10 boys who use their talents and 10 girls who use their talents. The Lightkeepers series by Irene Howat. What can you do for God? These 10 boys grew up to become successful men. The two things they have in common is that they all put to good use the talents and gifts that they had, and all believed that God had given them to be used. These 10 girls all believed that God had given them special gifts, and they put those talents to use. What are your gifts, and how can you use them to spread God's kingdom? Review. This is the first of the series of 10, 5 involving boys and 5 involving girls, geared towards elementary school age and homeschool learning. I think the whole series is going to be delightful, and it was. In this volume, 10 boys include Paul Brand, Gilead Prance, C.S. Lewis, C.T. Studd, Wilfred Grenfell, John Sebastian Bach, James Clerk Maxwell, Samuel Morse, George Washington Carver, and John Bunyan. It follows a similar pattern story of about 15 pages each, so really digestible. The section starts off with a childhood and family setting and moves to either some early important events or through to teenage and college age, and then into adulthood of what they're kind of known for. The stories include mostly fictional conversations so as to give young readers more than just facts to remember. The conversations are in the spirit of learning about that person. Each person also has a focus on their Christian faith, and it usually inspires the conclusion of the story as a way to glorify God. At the end, there is a fact of the story expanded upon, a keynote that focuses on the aspect of the story to which about God, a think area in which a challenge question is presented for discussion, and a prayer section. As the title suggests, the concentration is on each person's talent that led them to something they are famous for, and how God used these talents to bless others. This could be in the scientific field, the arts, missionary, and ministry, or invention. The stories are long enough to create a story arc, but not so long as that someone interested in another story couldn't move along. For the adults, we sometimes have trouble discovering new topics to study, and sometimes like this could give one idea of someone to read about, or a time period, or a subject matter. The only thing I wish the book would do is maybe suggest a few expanded reading books, but that's easy enough to do on one's own these days. One of my favorite areas of this book is that it does not glance over or ignore death, hardships, or troubles. The more I teach my children about their learning, other people's lives, and even my own life as well as an example, I find focusing on the failures as well as the triumphs are just as important to give, to learn, and grow. I would highly recommend this book and series, and assuming they all are similar. Final grade, A. The first entry into the girls section of the series, it's just not as good as the boys, and the flaw resides not in the subject matter of it being women, but in how well the boys' stories were structured, and the girls were not. In this volume, 10 girls include Harriet Beecher Stowe, Mildred Cable, Sarah Edward, Annie Lawton, Maureen McKenna, Katie Ann McKinnon, Selena, Countess of Huntington, Helen McCammon, Patricia St. John, and Mary Verhest. Follows each of the same stories of about 15 pages each. I really enjoyed the boys' version of this entry. It had details from their childhood that built up in the career path or missionary work, or what talents they would end up developing. Along the way, their coming to Christ was included, and specific enough to also be built into the abbreviated storyline. The conclusion combined everything into what was the outcome of their lives using the talents talked about earlier. How it fails to do that here for the most part. Other than a few medically trained women, there aren't really any talents developed within the storyline. The women chosen did some great things, but it fails to build the talent, and it comes off as this girl did a thing. That's not the story in the boys section. The story of coming to faith feels very thrown in here as well, and feels for many of the stories just a thing that the girls came to. The positive aspects of this book is that it brings many unknown women from church history to young readers. However, the impact of their lives and their talents just aren't there. For example, Sarah Edwards, wife of Jonathan Edwards, is a pretty amazing woman who faced a lot of hardships in her life, but her story doesn't build her childhood into the overall story. She seems to just happen to come to faith in Christ. She lives a hard life, but glorifies God in some sense. Then she dies. The story isn't cohesive, and it isn't compelling like Gilead Prance with his botany. That was a perfect story written for the boys' side. Having the high task of writing about a group of people who were just as important to Christ's kingdom, but not as always focused on, this really fell flat, and it's a shame that it did. It's not a terrible book at all or terribly written. It just missed the cohesiveness of the boys' version. Final grade, C-.